So here I am with Landy. Landy, are you an organizer of this event?
I'm not an organizer of this event. I'm a supporter, Robert. I'm a supporter of this event. First of all, I'd just like to thank you and Rebel News for being here today to cover this important event. I'm the chair of the foundation to commemorate the Chinese railroad workers in Canada. We stand against social justice. Our group is here showing support to the organizers. We know the organizers, but we're here today to show support.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome.
We were in Ottawa yesterday for a very exclusive and private unveiling of a plaque honoring and recognizing 100 years of racist, legislative racism against our Chinese ancestors. It's called the Chinese Exclusion Act. It took place on July 1st, 1923. So yesterday, the senators, the dignitaries, and representatives from social justice and human rights groups from all over Canada came to receive an apology and an unveiling of a plaque that's going to be archived in the very first Chinese Canadian Museum in Victoria, BC. Why today, after yesterday's apology, where our Chinese ancestors were asked to sign their names on a Chinese registry? That's what happened 100 years ago, and if our ancestors did not sign their name on this Chinese registry, they were persecuted, they were imprisoned, they were fined. There was legislative discrimination against Chinese people while the Chinese were recruited here to build the railway system. And then they were excluded by way of the Chinese Exclusion Act. I'm sorry, 80,000 people paid the head tax. 17,000 Chinese laborers were brought here to build the railway. And then on July 1st, 1923, they were excluded. First by the head tax, that didn't stop people from coming. Then they increased the head tax, that didn't stop people from coming. So then they instituted the Chinese Exclusion Act, or what they refer to as the Chinese Immigration Act. And the Chinese Exclusion Act, after 80,000 people, 80,000 of my Chinese ancestors were brought over. 80,000 paid the head tax. On July 1st, people were excluded. Men were here. This created a bachelor society. The Chinese Exclusion Act disrupted family systems. Women and children grew up. Women, wives were left on their own in China. Women grew up, children grew up not knowing their fathers. And for 24 years, it took the Chinese community 24 years of advocacy to repeal the act. And they finally did that. And so now, today, this harkens back to a totalitarianism society. This is a police state asking people again to sign their names. That's what they did with the Chinese Exclusion Act. This is what's happening again today with this respective legislation.
Okay, yeah, this is what I want to ask you about. This respective legislation. Are we specifically talking about the Foreign Influence Registry Act and/or the Foreign Agents Registry Act? Are these the acts that you're referring to?
These are the acts I'm referring to, and that's why everyone is here today, because asking people to register. Listen, I'm down with protecting Canada and making sure that our freedoms and rights are not corrupted by foreign influences. There's nothing wrong with that. Let's take a lesson out of our American brothers and sisters over there. There's nothing wrong with protecting our freedoms and rights and protecting who we are as Canadians. But asking people to register, not asking, demanding and legislating people to register is no different than the Chinese Immigration Act or the Chinese Exclusion Act. What's happening here today is this is one step away from a police state. Like, listen, this is look at all the people here. This is not representing the voice of the people. These people in the group here are educators, laborers. They represent social justice and human rights. Our group, who we represent, the Chinese community, we're standing here together as one Canada, one Canadian community, saying this is wrong, okay? And your role, Robert, as a media reporter, to share what's happening here, because I think that the average Canadian doesn't understand what's happening here. The consultation was very limited. There was not good media coverage on the consultation. Most Canadians are just working and trying to keep lights on and food on the table. Like, we're not paying attention to what's happening politically. We rely on the media to help us. We rely on the advocacy groups to help us. Our job is to help people understand. My vice chair, Derek Wu, our job and my job as the chair of the foundation, is to help people understand the Chinese contribution to the building of the railroad and the 4,000 lives that were lost, nameless, faceless, during the construction of the railway system. And then we were kicked to the curb. There's that one Chinese picture in the most famous picture of the hammering of the last spike on November 7, 1885. We're looking after the railroad business. Can the advocacy groups and the media groups do their job and look after this and help raise awareness to this? I live in my small backyard here with Derek. We're helping to raise awareness on the racist legislation from the Chinese Exclusion Act and the impacts on the Chinese community. That's why we're here. 100 years it took us to get here. Are we starting again? Get the clock and set your clock. This is the start of the next 100 years.
Let's switch sides because my arm's getting exhausted.
Okay. But listen, what's happening here is
Sorry,
so
may I
wrong.
continue my interview?
And,
Thank you.
What's happening here is so wrong, and the majority of Canadians don't understand what's happening here, Robert.
Okay, Lenny, you mentioned a moment ago that you don't see any issue with countering or addressing foreign influence operations. Does the Canadian government have any legitimate interest in countering influence operations or compromise operations from the Chinese Communist Party? Is that something that they should be cognizant of?
I'm not going to, and again, this is about allowing the experts. I'm not an expert in these things. We need to get our experts, and we need to amplify and promote the voice of the groups that have the expertise in that. I'm here today showing support, and I'm here today because Ottawa invited us yesterday to recognize 100 years of racist legislation by way of the Exclusion Act. I mean, think about it. Canada Day, July 1st, what does that represent for most Canadians? For our Chinese community, it represents Humiliation Day. We don't call it Canada Day. And I want to, so every group has to do their part. Our group has done their part to acknowledge. Here's Ivan from Vancouver doing his part in BC, doing his part to raise awareness. He printed a book to talk around the legislation and the impacts on family and communities, children and wives, mental health. Think about the separation and think about the humiliation to sign the Chinese Immigration Act. And now we're doing that again with this registry. Listen, CSIS is behind the scenes doing their work. Let them do their work. They know who the negative players are. They know who the nefarious characters are around the world. Let them do their work, because that's the work that they do. We don't need to interfere with that. But when you ask people, once again, to sign a registry, that is wrong, especially after 100 years of the Chinese Exclusion Act. Do we not learn from our history? We're repeating history here. This is a police state. This is a totalitarianism effort on our government to have, and listen, what are the parameters to put people's names on this registry? I'm not an expert in it, so I'm relying on the experts in the political arena to do their job. I'm relying on the media. You're responsible to help people understand. You've got to get the interviews with the organizers. I'm not an organizer. We're here to show our support. The foundation to commemorate the Chinese railroad workers. We are all functions to show support for and stand up against social injustice, against our community, and against all discrimination at large, gender, language, ageism, all of this, homophobia, all of this discrimination is wrong. Our little part, our little backyard is in the Chinese railroad. And I invite people to come to our website, fccrwc.com. Read the history of the Chinese Exclusion Act. It starts with education. It ends with advocacy. So your report will help incite that fire. There's fire. When people hear about this, I find it very hard to believe that the average Canadian would allow something like this to happen. There were a small number of Canadians that understand what's happening here today. And so you have that responsibility, Robert. I'm counting on you. And no, I just would like to say, and all of the media that were here today to interview us, our foundation and our friends showing their support. I just want to thank them about the important role that they're playing. Because how to think about identity. Identity is constructed in our education system and through our social media. So your role is, I would argue, even more important because that media influences the education system. That's where there's political and social will. Through the media, it's going to make change.
I joined you the last one, and I I got it. Thank you for
Okay,
coming and indulgence.
thank you. Thank you.